Hey, it's Pete Gustus with Philly Metro Commercial Real Estate with some great news. 2024, hopefully and beyond, will be something very good for the Reading Berks County area. There's laws being passed right now, which are a NIZ and a CRIZ, and these incentives can give potential grant money, tax incentives, and many other things to the city of Reading, which would allow businesses to grow quickly. That includes hospitality, like restaurants, bars, also film industry, as well as affordable housing. Sadly, they decided not to include industrial development. I don't know why exactly. But the great thing with these incentives, well, watch the meeting I was in. Check it out. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you need help too, it's Pete Gustus with Philly Metro Commercial Real Estate, 610-209-9219. Have a great day.
As we are confronted with some terrible attacks in our world. And, you know, as a former New Yorker, it reminds me back of 9/11. So please forgive me for my personal passion for the tragedies that are occurring. So I'm going to respectfully ask you to please join me in just in a moment of silence before we continue our celebration. Thank you. And that's a celebration, if you heard, because that's exactly what it is. You know, the fact that we are here gathered today to talk about something that has been beyond our wildest dreams. We thought about it in 2013, but we didn't get over the hump. But yet, you know, we have gone over the hump, and we are closer than ever to make the city of Reading and Berks County the best of its glory that we have been missing for so many years. The fact that we have an opportunity to bring Reading to those glory days, to bring back the Fortune 500 companies, because that's exactly what's going to happen. The economic rehabilitation that is going to occur is beyond what has happened in who knows how many centuries. So, you know, it's a celebration. It's a moment to embrace, to work together. God knows I have been tirelessly on the phones and meeting with legislators up in the state level to make this happen, as well as working with our city government to make sure that we get our authority back on. So again, great things are happening. But it takes the whole village, as they say, right? It takes all of us. You know, Berks is Reading. Reading is Berks. Whenever I go anywhere, you know, I can mention any place in the county, and they pretty much know what I'm referring to. So I'm excited. I'm honored. I'm going to continue to work hard as long as I'm around. I have given 100%, and moving forward, I'm going to give you 110%. But again, we have to continue to collaborate. We have to make sure that we do this together, because the minute one of us think that, you know, we got this on our own, we lost. We lost. And this is much too big. This is much bigger than us. This is much bigger than any individual. There's opportunities for people that are currently here and people to come. But we have to do it together. And, you know, and this new codes that was presented, you know, it talks about many things, including housing, which is, you know, something that some of the other zones didn't have in the past. So I'm excited because they're being creative up in the state legislature. They're tweaking it a little bit, and they're making it specifically for us. But if we, excuse the expression, I think we all know, if we screw this up, we're not going to get another chance. And again, what a better way to maybe give it right back to Katie so that we could invite and introduce the person we were waiting for. So, so I was just trying to buy time. But again, truly, I'm honored. I'm excited. Like I said, I'm 110% in. We're creating some amazing synergy as we go along, and you know, our better days are yet to come. I count on your support.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Thankfully, Representative Guzman was able to join us, so if you want to come on up. So since you're just wandering in, apologies.
Yes.
I've got folks on Zoom to
All
that
right,
camera, but we've also got the room so you can feel comfortable. But I just wanted to give a chance to, I opened this up with why this is important, why we need to be loud and advocate for this, because as the mayor said, we only get so many bites at this apple, and we only get one. So I wanted to kind of rally the troops. I did invite all of our advocacy folks, as well as I invited representatives from the Reading Birch Realtors, Latino Chamber, and I invited City Council. So I tried to make this as open as I could, and I am recording it. So we're going to share it with anybody who couldn't be here.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
A lot of pressure.
All right.
Here I am to sell you all. All right, well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Manny Guzman. I'm proud to represent the city of Reading in the 127th Legislative District, which is pretty much the majority of the city of Reading. And I've been there in Harrisburg now for about 3 years. This is my second term. So we're here to talk about an exciting new opportunity that's in front of us, that it's a once in a generational opportunity. For those of you who have been around the block for a while, you know, I was a kid growing up. This is my hometown, right? I grew up in Reading. I grew up on the south side of Reading. So, you know, I went to school in Reading. So when I talk to you about, you know, reinvesting and remolding and remaking Reading, it's really personal for me because I grew up there. I grew up on the streets. I grew up there. And so it's personal for me. It's personal for my family. And so I have a personal interest in wanting to see us move in the right direction and really become that diamond in the rough, right? And really polished, right? That I know that we're all capable of becoming. And so NIZ, right? I mean, this is something that is obviously really exciting and very new. But again, for those of you who have been around the block, NIZ is a tax structure program that only one city in the entire Commonwealth currently has, and that's the city of Allentown. As you all know, Secretary Brown, who is now, well, actually Senator Brown, who's now Secretary Brown, he was the key champion in passing that through the Senate back in 2011, I believe. And since then, you know, Allentown has been able to generate over $1 billion of development, 4,000 new jobs, 1,000 plus new apartments in downtown Allentown. I mean, for those of you who have been in Allentown over the last decade, I'm sure if you've noticed the transformation that has happened in downtown Allentown over the last 15 to 20 years. Well, we have that opportunity here now in the city of Reading. So to give some context, the current language that's in the NIZ bill, and I think Katie passed it around to all of you. So hopefully you all have read it and stuff like that. So don't freak out, because there were a couple technical amendments that we made that we passed last week that, you know, were brought to our attention. So, you know, to make sure that it was all inclusive. So here's what the game plan is, ladies and gentlemen. As of right now, as I said, Allentown is the only city that has this special tax structure. We're hopeful that right now we got this out of the House of Representatives in House Bill 1219. We were negotiating for a CRIZ, but I was able at the last moment to get a NIZ into the bill, and it was kind of a last moment kind of thing. But I'm very glad that it was able to fall into place and we were able to get this push. So why is this so important? So our play right now is, of course, now it's passed out of the House of Representatives. Now it's entirely in the Senate of Pennsylvania. And so the game plan is, of course, there's a senator out there in Erie called Dan Laughlin, and he's also been a huge proponent of a CRIZ and NIZ for Erie as well. And so I've designed the legislation and wrote the legislation to try to be as inclusive as possible, to not only include the city of Reading, but also include the city of Erie. So in order for the Senate to actually pass this, it actually be very quick, an amendment to this bill to really just remove a sentence or two and make one technical amendment to the language. And once they do that, it would automatically apply to the city of Erie as well. And so that's kind of the legislative kind of horse trading that's been going on. I mean, those of you that have know about this legislative process, there's a lot of horse trading that happens. There's going to be a lot of horse trading that continues to happen over the next several weeks. As I said, now the ball is entirely in the Senate's court. And so I'm asking those of you who have political, social connections with those individuals who serve in the Senate, you know, I'm asking you to pick up the call and make some calls. I think all of you in this room can understand and can have seen firsthand the monumental transformational impact that the NIZ has had in Allentown, but also the CRIZ, which is a babier version of NIZ, but CRIZ that has been working in Lancaster, Bethlehem, and believe it or not, Tamaqua. So these programs have been proven to work. It's working in these places. We want it to work here in the city of Reading and in Berks County as well. We believe that this would have not just an impact on my hometown, the city of Reading, which of course I'm biased in saying, yes, I want Reading to get back on the map, right? But I believe that this will have a monumental impact, not only just in Reading, but across our county and across our region. And just tying in finally, and I'll shut up and take some questions very soon, but just tying into what Senator Casey just announced with the hydrogen hub, right, in southeastern Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if those of you read the news, right, but we just got announced that we're going to get a hydrogen hub here in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. So tying that into what we're doing here with the NIZ and with the manufacturing that's going to happen all across southeastern Pennsylvania, Berks County is prime and is right, because we're right dead in the middle. We're right there. We're close enough to Philly. We're close enough to Pittsburgh. We're close enough to DC. We're right around in all the corridors that serve international business. And so we are right for development. And I'm just so excited about our future. And I can't wait to work with all of you to make that a reality. So I'm going to shut up and take any and all questions that y'all may have. I know I just threw a lot at you.
That's okay.
I have one here. So when we talk to senators in Harrisburg, what objections are we gonna hear from them? I mean, it seems sort of like a no-brainer, but I'm sure they'll have some pushback.
Yes, so I mean, some of the pushback has been, quite frankly, and to be quite frank in all the folks in the room, the pushback has been the cost, and it is gonna be a significant cost to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in terms of initial upfront dollars. Because of course, we're talking about tax revenues, we're talking about cigarette tax, talking about hotel tax, and I'll let the gentleman here from McNeese go over the specific taxes. But there's going to be a lot of state resources that, instead of being diverted to the state, will now be diverted back into this neighborhood assistance program, neighborhood improvement zone, and/or CRIZ zone. So it's a big financial hit. Here would be my I guess counterbalance to that, or counter argument to that. And I would say that Allentown, as it currently speaks, it's 10 years into their NIZ, and they're currently in the green in terms of their NIZ. So their NIZ is now currently generating funds for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So yes, it's taken about 10 years for us to get there. But if you look at what Allentown has been able to do with over 1.2, I think $1.3 billion of development over the last 10 to 15 years, now that zone is in the green. And so, yes, there is an initial upfront cost that some of our friends probably won't like because of the use of tax dollars, and maybe they have different opinions in terms of how those tax dollars should be used. But there is an initial upfront cost that the Commonwealth does need to eat. But we're hopeful that over the course of the CRIZ or the NIZ, which again is going to be, at least it's in the legislation, it's over a 30-year period. We're hopeful that over the 30-year period, we get into the green and actually start paying the Commonwealth back for the investment that it makes in the city and in our county.
Yep.
I'm looking at this development project like apartments, because I'm trying to get my building at 500 North 3rd Street and turn it into the affordable senior apartments.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Peter. And that is one of the special proponents of this bill, right? And that's one of the biggest difference from our piece of legislation to what Allentown has. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because what we found in Allentown and in Bethlehem and Lancaster, and I guess a little bit in Tamaqua, but not so much, is the fact that while we've seen a lot of economic growth, we've also seen a huge amount of maybe gentrification is not the right word, but we've seen people pushed out of the housing market. And as you all know, the housing market here in the city of Reading and in Berks County is already at a crunch. Rents are at an all-time high, right? And so we wanted to learn the lessons that, that we learned from Allentown, from Lancaster, from other places. And so a key part of this legislation is that 20%, I believe it's 20%, 20% of the funding that is to be used in this neighborhood improvement zone needs to go into affordable housing. So we're talking about mixed use, we're talking about, mixed use resource development, folks that from low, moderate to high income level, all living in the same communal areas. And, that's kind of the goal of the piece of the legislation. And we're hopeful that once we have the NIZ or the CRIZ, which by the way, thankful to the city of Reading for finally authorizing a CRIZ authority so that we can finally start to get to work on some of the back end stuff. But to answer your question, Peter, succinctly, there will be funding available within the taxing structure of this to allow for affordable housing, to allow for the creation of those units that we know we desperately need, not just in Reading, but all across the county.
Thanks.
Hey, Manny.
Oh, Pam.
Pam, hey, Pam, all right.
How are you, Manny? Thanks for coming out this morning. I apologize that I'm not there in person, but wondering where the administration stands on this, making sure that, they're on board as well.
Listen, so I appreciate your question, Pam. The administration is on board 100% as in terms of my conversations with both the governor personally, and of course his prior legislative director. We won't get into that, but now his current legislative director. So I have myself and the senator have had robust conversations with the governor and his team, and of course Senator Laughlin is of course having conversations with the administration and his team. And what the governor is telling us is, hey, listen, I'm open to the opportunity. I'm open to the possibility because let's face it, y'all, our governor does have some higher ambitions, right? And so he wants a story to tell at the national level, right? And so this is a perfect opportunity, right, to take two of the poorest industrial cities of the past, right, and use this tax structure program to help revitalize them. I've sold it to him in those terms, and I could see his eyes light up because I think it touches to what he's trying to do, not just in the Commonwealth, but of course his own personal ambitions.
FBI Special Agent April Brooks.
So I'm hopeful that he is 100% supportive. Yes, Pam, yes.
Manny, good morning. So my question is pretty much in sync with hers. What do we look at time-wise?
So the time is now. So ladies and gentlemen, this was passed last week out of the House of Representatives in House Bill 1219. We all go back to session, both the House and the Senate this week. And so now, as I said, now this is entirely in the Senate's hands. We passed our pieces of the budget. I think there's still some other pieces that we need to pass out. So now this is entirely in the Senate's hands. And so, mi gente, the longer this process goes, and this is why I need you all to start using your political, social, economic connections. The longer this process goes into the budget impasse, the higher the likelihood that this gets plucked out for a compromise deal that gets us over the finish line. And so time is of the essence. It is, the great thing about it is that it is in the vehicle. It already exists in the tax code and the fiscal code, excuse me. And so barring, somebody taking it out purposefully, we're hopeful that we're able to hopefully convince our Senate colleagues on both the Democratic side, because of course we want to make sure that we keep our Democratic colleagues engaged, right? Senator Costa and Senator Hughes. Senator Costa being the minority leader, and Senator Hughes being the minority appropriations chairman. But of course, Judy, who's our biggest senator, and Senator Gebhardt, right, is making sure that they understand how important this is. But also, if you have contacts with Senator Joe Pittman, right, who is the majority leader in the Senate right now, he is an individual that, potentially could have the power to pluck this out. Another individual, of course, who has probably more of an impact in terms of their ability to pull it out would be Senator Martin out of Lancaster, right? Senator Martin is the appropriations chairman, the majority appropriations chairman in the Senate. And so those two individuals, along with, making sure that we talked with any of our other Senate Republicans, are really going to be the key individuals that we really need to convince over the next couple of weeks to keep the language as is and expand it towards Erie. And so the goal here, ladies and gentlemen, is it's kind of an all or nothing approach. It's either both Erie and Reading get it, or nobody get it, or nobody gets it. And so that's kind of how I'm playing it. That's kind of how, you know, I've been negotiating it with the House. I know now that Senator Schwenk has been actively involved now in the Senate, and I'm sure she'll be a huge champion in pushing that over the finish line. But she's going to need your help. She's going to need, you know, folks in your political and social circles to reach out to these politicians and Republicans in the majority Senate to make sure that they help us, help our community get this thing over the finish line.
Thank you, Manny.
Are you starting to organize any collective effort with chamber, local reps, and then Erie Chamber, Erie reps to try to build that coalition?
So that's what we're here to do now. So I brought in Katie into the process. And so, you know, a lot of this, and just to give you guys some of the background, a lot of this has been going on now since about April. These conversations have been going on since, you know, our appropriations hearings, when I initially brushed the governor and he initially, you know, mentioned his potential interest in this, you know. And so a lot of this may seem like it's new, but I can guarantee you that there have been robust conversations happening, you know, behind the scenes. And now I felt comfortable bringing Katie in and bringing you all in, right? Because I didn't want to bring you all in and then there not be a final hard product on the table, because at that point we'll just be spinning our wheels. So now that we actually have, you know, pen to paper, you know, an actual vehicle that's actually in front of the Senate, now, you know, I felt it was appropriate to bring you all in and bring the various stakeholders in both Reading and Erie. Of course, the Erie representatives are doing their lobbying on their behalf, of course, and I'm hopeful that they're holding their end of the bargain to gin up community support. But it seems like Erie is doing a pretty good job of doing that. They already have their authority board set up, and I think they're almost ready to go in terms of hitting the ground running. Thanks. Well, more work to be done.
Question, are there strategies and a plan already in place if this money does come in to share at some point with all of us to say this is how we plan on using the dollars? Is there, I know there's
Yeah, so no, and that's something that you know, it's curious that you say that, because the mayor and I was having a conversation, I think maybe a day ago now, about, you know, how do we start some of this back end stuff? Because the goal, of course, and if you read the language, is that we are designated this in 24, right? And so the goal, of course, is not to wait 6 months while we're planning and trying to build this up, right? It's trying to get a lot of this back end stuff completed now. And so you're absolutely right. So what the mayor and I discussed, because of some of the initial challenges that we needed to work through with you know, with our city government partners, you know, so we're still trying to work out what the mechanics of this authority looks like. But what I can tell you is that we feel confident that within the next week or two, we're going to be announcing, you know, who those members of the authority are, and we're hopeful that they start to get to work in terms of building the back end stuff that we're going to need to start to hit the ground running in 24. But that is a TBD question, and I'm hopeful that in the new year we can come back with y'all with more concrete information. Right now, the big goal is we need the Senate to not pluck this out. We need them to pass it, and I need the governor to sign it. And once we do that, then we can have a more robust conversation about how and what we use the dollars for.
And I guess my second part of that will you involve the business community in that? I know you'll have an authority.
Yes.
But in those decisions and in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And absolutely. And so, you know, I don't want to say who the names are, but I think you all will be happy in terms of GRCA's representation of some of the names that we've been throwing back and forth. So absolutely, you know, we recognize, and, you know, even speaking, hey, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not naive. I know, you know, and I'm a Democrat. I got Democratic ideals, and sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. But on the things that we can agree on, like economic development, I'm here to let you all know that I'm here to work with you all in a bipartisan way, in a pragmatic way, to really make sure that we move our community in a direction that I know that we all think that it's capable of. So absolutely, we want to have the business community involved, the communities, and we want to have the community's involvement in this, because it's really going to be a team effort if we really want to see the fruits of this labor within the next 15, 20, 30 years. So yes, to answer your question succinctly.
So I'll tell you, I may be on a day off in the middle of my daughter's dance recital, but I still pick up your phone call. So, so want to give a chance. So turn the presentation over to Tim Horstman from McNeese, because he's actually going to fill in a bunch of this, the detail stuff. So we've got a lot of things on the table, a lot of good opportunities. But want to give Tim a chance to kind of explain what he's been working on. So when all of this was being discussed, I reached out to Jack Gumbach. I know Jack's online. I said, there's a lot of this going on. I need somebody who understands what this all means in a sentence, and he recommended Tim. So no pressure. So Tim Horstman comes to us from McNeese, Wallace and Nurek. He is a tax attorney there, and he's actually been very instrumental in the Lancaster CRIZ program. He is a Penn State Dickinson Law graduate, and is very active. Also, you do a lot of work with craft breweries and distilleries and fun stuff.
I do.
So that sounds like some fun extracurricular. But want to give him a chance to kind of explain what some of this is with these two programs, as well as some examples of what we can do. The nice part is this is not brand new. So we have 4 other communities to take as lessons learned. So we can have a program that benefits Reading and is actually the right one for us. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you and I'll get your presentation up.
Well, thank you, Katie. And let me first say a big thank you to Representative Guzman for coming today, and great presentation this morning. It was great to hear about some of the horse trading going on. I was curious to know where things are in the Senate with this potential legislation. I also want to thank the mayor for coming today, and for everyone else to come as well. I appreciate it, and for everyone on Zoom this morning. So again, my name is Tim Horstman. I've been at McNeese, Wallace and Nurek since 2007, and I'm just going to take my phone out of my pocket because it's ringing. Better. Let's put it over here so it does not make a lot of noise that goes off. Okay, so I've been at McNeese since 2007. I've been working in really as a tax lawyer, but working primarily in public finance. So as a public finance lawyer, what I do is I represent local governments, cities, townships. I've represented the state a few times. Whenever they want to borrow money or access governmental programs that rely on special tax code interpretations, they call me. And that is clearly a pre-pandemic picture right there. Thank you. I'm at the point now where I kind of just want to leave it up just because it's a great picture to show when people see me in real life. I had the pleasure of representing the city of Lancaster in connection with the establishment and the initial funding and setting up the structure of the Lancaster CRIZ Authority. Very interesting stories there, going back to the original legislation and dealing with an administration that wasn't too pleased with the legislation and really was taking positions that were kind of trying to limit its impact. And thankfully, we had the legislation amended, and it's turned into a great story for the city and just a great success story. So the CRIZ Authority and the expanded NIZ Authority. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of give you a brief introduction of what these concepts mean in terms of the tax code and how they work and how they're funded. So CRIZ Authority was initially set up in 2013, substantially amended in 2016 to address some of the interpretations that had arisen over those 3 years. As Representative Guzman indicated, this expanded NIZ Authority opportunity is in House Bill 1219, and initially would specifically apply to the city of Reading, although it's great to hear that it may also apply to the city of Erie. So how does the CRIZ Authority work? I like the baby brother analogy. I also like I was going to say it's that you got the CRIZ Authority, and then the NIZ Authority is a CRIZ Authority on steroids. But essentially what the CRIZ authority is created to do is it's gonna just, set up a CRIZ zone in the jurisdiction and then use its powers to, whether it be financing structures, financing improvements, or working with third parties to do those improvements. The key thing here is, and it's kind of cut off here, I don't know if we can minimize that, but the facility has to be used for commercial, industrial, sports, exhibition, hospitality, conference, retail, community office, recreational, mixed-use purposes. So long description of what the CRIZ authority can be used to finance or undertake, but it also includes related infrastructure. And what I found interesting about the NIZ authority, so you've got a similar list here of things, but the main difference here is while you've got commercial, industrial, things like that, you've specifically got residential and affordable housing included there. As Representative Guzman indicated, that was one of the key things to include in this potential legislation, to specifically permit the financing undertaking of affordable housing, much needed affordable housing improvements. The legislation ties that term to the 30-30 rule, so it's got to be intended to provide housing for individuals and families at that 30% of the average income in the area. Basically tying it to HUD requirements. But the other thing you'll notice about this is it leaves out industrial, which I think is appropriate here because the city of Reading and now the city of Erie, they're not really known at this point for being these industrial powerhouses. And we need to have a substantial amount of redevelopment and improvement to move beyond that, to move from the past and go to a new development. So specifically excludes the industrial component. As far as how these zones are created, what's great about the NIZ authority is that you don't have to do anything. Once that legislation passes, it's an as of right, power. So you have that created. The city council can then move forward with creating a NIZ authority and just, file the necessary paperwork with DCD. When it comes to the CRIZ authority, however, you've got to go through an application and approval process with the Department of Community Economic Development. Now that process has been in place since 2016 when the legislation was amended. The problem we've had since 2016 was we had an administration that had just had a policy that they were not going to approve any new CRIZ authorities in Pennsylvania. So as a result, there have been no CRIZ authorities created since those initial ones were created back in 2013. I've been told that the Shapiro administration is very much in favor of economic development, wants to see some economic development wins in the state now, and great to hear about the hydrogen hub. And I've heard that they are going to be taking a good long look at the CRIZ legislation, and hopefully we'll see some CRIZ authorities created as well. Oh, and similar lift though, in both cases, you've got 30 years to have this zone created. Now, one of the things to point out here, a difference is with the location of the zone. For this expanded NIZ opportunity, it has to be located wholly within the city limits. The CRIZ zone is a little bit different. You can actually go beyond the city limits and go to contiguous municipalities that maybe have a parcel or two that you think this makes sense to include. Keep in mind though, with the CRIZ zone, you've got to get that approved by DCDD. So don't think of this as an opportunity to expand dramatically into the suburbs with the creation of this. It's really more there for if you've got an area that you think again makes sense financially and economically in terms of development to include this outlying parcel that's part of the again the contiguous area. Okay, so funding differences. Both of these, both the CRIZ authority statute and this legislation are very similar in terms of how they create the financing mechanism. Both are basically just run the gamut of all state and local taxes with a couple exceptions and a couple minor differences. The big one though is that Neither of these includes real estate taxes, so the real estate taxes you pay on your personal residence, business real estate taxes. Neither of them include cigarette taxes. Those ones the state continues to collect and will continue to collect under either of these proposals. With respect to the rest of them, though, it's everything. So it's corporate net income, earned income taxes, personal income taxes, sales and use taxes, really anything you can think of that a business or an individual is paying in the zone. It's gonna be included in the in that pie. The big difference, though, is that the CRIZ specifically includes hotel occupancy taxes, but the expanded NIZ does not. What's interesting about this, though, is while the hotel taxes are not included in the NIZ does provide for restrictions on what can be done with those taxes going forward. Basically saying that if you have hotel taxes that are being imposed, you can't take those monies and put them towards something beyond specifically hotel improvements. And then what's interesting too, I found about the NIZ, they specifically cover any new tax that could be introduced in the future. The CRIZ does not do that. So again, if there's a new tax, if we move to a different type of tax system, the NIZ has you covered, so you still continue to collect the tax revenue. Now, really the big difference here, this is the most important one I would say, with the CRIZ authority, you're only collecting the incremental revenue over and above what's called the baseline. So in the first year that the CRIZ is created, you look at the amount of tax revenue that was generated in the CRIZ zone, and that is your baseline. And you only collect, the increase. So it's kind of like a TIF financing. If you're familiar with tax increment financings, those are based off of real estate revenues, and the idea there is you have a baseline of real estate tax revenues, and the incremental increase from new development is siphoned off and used to pay for those improvements. So similar setup for CRIZs. Now for NIZs, you get the whole thing. So it's a huge windfall, and this is why you've seen such dramatic improvements undertaken in the city of Allentown, because every dollar, every state and local tax dollar that is being generated within the city of Allentown NIZ is going to that development now. So it will be the same type of system in the city of Reading if this legislation passed.
Question.
Yes.
For the hotel tax,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about in the city or in the neighborhood where it is. So in other words, the hotel that's located there, would that be extracted then from the tax? So in other words, if you have an authority or an organization who currently benefits from a hotel tax today, the way I'm reading this is any hotel that would be located in the city might be excluded from that going forward.
Yeah, they'd be excluded. My guess is there's likely going to be some carve outs so that if existing hotel tax revenues are going to pay debt service on an existing project, there's likely going to be a carve out so that that revenue will be secured, because obviously we can't have a situation where an existing project is relying on those revenues and then the revenue is being siphoned off. So my assumption would be that the final legislation would provide that that tax stream is not included, but to the extent that those tax revenues are not currently obligated, the authority couldn't take those and apply them to a new, they'd have to be reserved for, hotel improvements in the zone. Yes.
So just so I understand, I'm with the Visitors Bureau and the hotel tax funds our organization. So with the NIZ, they would be able to take all of that hotel tax from a current hotel in the city.
No, the NIZ, the hotel taxes are not part of that part of the pie. They're not part of the pie. That's the important takeaway here. The NIZ legislation does not allow the NIZ authority to take those revenues. Revenues are excluded from the tax base.
But the CRIZ would.
The CRIZ does have
Current.
Precisely. Yep. Okay, so another difference here is what happens to the money that you collect. So you collect all this money, and there's a question as to, do you get to keep it if you don't spend it all? And in most cases, for both the CRIZ and the expanded NIZ, you don't get to keep that revenue. But there's subtle differences here. And for the CRIZ statute, and we've used this to great effect in the city of Lancaster. Again, you have to return the money back to the Commonwealth or to the local taxing authorities every year. But for the city of Lancaster, it's utilized, budgeted, or appropriated. So you don't actually have to spend it as long as you've obligated the funds. So you've passed, so if you've got, with a CRIZ, if you have a resolution adopted that says we are going to spend this money on this project, you don't have to return that money to the Commonwealth. That legislation, it's different for the expanded NIZ. For the expanded NIZ, any money that is sitting in that account at year end, you've got to return it by January 30th. So it's a very quick turnaround. So it's really intended to get that money. It's encouraging you to spend that money on those projects and obligate those funds and have that spent and send it out the door. Yes.
Does this also include amusement tax?
Yes, it does include amusement tax. Yep.
So the NIZ would include amusement tax, the CRIZ would not.
No, they both include amusement. Yeah, they both. It's basically all taxes with that one difference being the hotel occupancy and then cigarette taxes and then cigarette and real estate. Yeah. Another difference here is this matching fund requirement. So this is similar to, like, if you're familiar with the RACB system, you've got to have matching funds. You got, for most governmental grant programs, you got to put some skin in the game. So very similar with the CRIZ. What's interesting there is for every, it's a 5-to-1 match. So for every $5 the CRIZ spends, you've got to have $1 of private or federal or local sources, that providing additional funding. There's no matching requirement in the NIZ. So the NIZ authority can really, has a lot more flexibility because they don't have to rely on getting, the city of Reading to chip in here. You don't have to get a private developer. Now, could you require that by local resolution? Yeah, you could. You could require a local matching requirement. Okay, so reporting, and this is probably the most important thing for business owners, that are going to be in the zone, the reporting obligations. So the first thing here is for the authority that's created. The authority does have to, maintain a list of the businesses that are in the zone, and they have to report that, to the Commonwealth. So the idea here is you have to provide the Commonwealth once a year a list of everybody that's in the zone that needs to file those reports, so that the Commonwealth knows how much revenue we're supposed to be diverting from the Treasury and sending to that local authority. What's interesting about the NIZ is that they have the NIZ legislation has very detailed requirements about monthly record keeping obligations, both on the part of the authority and any organization that leases any of these projects from the authority. You don't have any of that in the CRIZ law, but the reality is they should be doing that anyway. They need to keep track of their list of businesses. So I think it's a good addition to the legislation.
For the group, I printed off what is the NIZ business reporting packet for 2022. So I didn't print off a copy for everybody, but we'll pass this around just so you can kind of see it is pretty detailed.
And on that note there, the next slide is on the business reporting obligations. So you have to file, whether you're in a CRIZ or a NIZ, you've got to file annual reports, both on your state taxes and your local taxes. Because again, the reality here is we're talking about, state and local tax dollars that would otherwise be sent to the Commonwealth need to be sent, or sent to the local taxing authority, need to be sent to this newly established authority. So every business has to file these additional reports. So this is not a, you file your personal income tax, or you file your corporate net income tax return, and you just check a box and you add some info. It's a wholly separate reporting obligation. And most importantly, there are penalties that can be imposed if a business fails to file these. Keep in mind, but probably the most important thing here is it's a very quick deadline. So you get to January 31 and you've got to file, every business has to file that report. And it's an ongoing obligation. As long as there's a zone, you've got to file these reports every year. And the way we sold this in the in the Lancaster CRIZ is the reality is, yes, it's an additional reporting obligation, but the money that you are paying in taxes is coming right back into your community. So yes, it's a little annoyance that you got to file another report, but you got to look at the greater good here. And again, the team aspect of this, you're filing these reports all together so that revenue can come back and create additional jobs, additional economic development in your community. As far as the amount of the penalties, the minimum penalty is $1,250, $1,000 for state, $250 for local, but it can be much more than that. It's actually 100% of the taxes that otherwise would be paid. So you can, it's the greater of. So if you have if your tax liability is greater than $1,250, you pay that higher amount. So again, it's not a slap on the wrist, and it's intended to really encourage you to file those reports, because if you don't, the NIZ is not going to get that money. The other thing about this that I found interesting, I don't think it's on this slide. I didn't mention it, but so what happens to those penalties? So if businesses do pay penalties if they fail to file reports, for a CRIZ authority, that money goes to the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth imposes those penalties, collects it, but with the NIZ authority, they get those penalties. So again, even if you fail to file, if you fail to file a report, you're still benefiting the NIZ because the NIZ is going to collect that money. So that was just a very high level overview. If there are additional questions, certainly feel free to ask. There are copies of the slides there, and I have cards over there if you have additional questions. I didn't get into the financing structure. I didn't want to bore you too early in the morning here, but certainly if you have specific questions about how you finance these things, I mean, they're financed through any similar public financing structure. So again, if you've worked with businesses that have done tax increment financing, it's very similar to that. The idea being that the authority's gonna. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Well, no, finish your thought now.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea is the authority issues bonds. The bonds would not be guaranteed by the city of Reading. City of Reading would not have any liability if the authority failed to pay the debt service on the bonds. The sole repayment mechanism for the bonds would be the tax revenues that are generated and collected by the NIZ. And the NIZ legislation specifically authorizes the NIZ to use those tax revenues to pay the debt service. So you can issue bonds to finance projects, and you can issue bonds to refinance prior bonds. But very similar structure to other municipal financings. If you've worked with municipal authorities in other contexts, very similar.
What I was just gonna say, and Guzman touched on the politics of the loss of revenue. The Reading Eagle last weekend did a fabulous piece on the tip we did for Cabela's 20 years ago. I think my signature was on those papers. We had all of these same problems 20 years ago with Cabela's, and it's about retail, and you're not going to do anything. We were trying to make the case in theory about everything would happen around that intersection of 78 and 61. Proof is 20 years later, it really did work, and the financing worked and everything else. So I would commend to everybody, take a look at that Eagle article. TIP is different than this, obviously, but the analogy is really, really strong. I'm glad you brought up TIPs, because it did work to give us the out parcel and the infrastructure development that then allowed for all that other development besides the store itself. Jeremy, of course, has a lot more information available in the IDA files and everything from that. But those politics were very much like this. And I think the proof is in the pudding 20 years later. So.
Yeah. I mean, the TIF financings are a great corollary. I mean, they're very similar to the structure. Again, the goal here is to leverage those tax dollars in a way to generate development that wouldn't happen otherwise. Question?
So you worked hand in hand with the group in Lancaster as a participant, looking at lessons learned and what you may be able to impart to our organization in Reading as our authority reconvenes. and insight?
Yeah, I would say, when it comes to, whether it's a NIZ or, hopefully it's a NIZ, but whether it's the NIZ or a CRIZ, as you start to get that process rolling, you want that authority, I would say, to hold some open hearings and get people to come out and talk about what they want to see done in the city. You want to get the city buy-in, because again, the businesses that are there need to be persuaded, you need to get the business buy-in, because they're the ones who are, filing these reports and undertaking that additional obligation. So you need to get their buy-in, and you want to hold a lot of public hearings to talk about what the plan is, and you want to have that open, transparent. I think that's the most important thing.
This, I saw, if I remember correctly on one of your slides, the CRIZ itself, was that did that have to be matched a dollar?
Yeah, so
Private funds,
so for every $5, what's that?
but the NIZ did not?
The NIZ does not. The NIZ legislation does not have matching requirements, but that's not to say that the authority could not adopt its own policies that say that if you want to do a project and take advantage of these public dollars, because again, these are public tax dollars. Let's not fool ourselves. These are public monies. If you want to avail yourself of that support, you've got to still got to put some skin in the game.
Just a general question, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but so in Lancaster, it's the Lancaster City Alliance is the manager. So I'm hearing a lot of like reporting is required throughout this process. And so their president at LCA is the acting executive director. What is the contemplated structure for our community to manage all of this reporting? And
I would defer that to the mayor and the city council, because really when it comes to the creation of authority.
Should we get out markers?
Yeah.
Like.
It's not a good question, I'm just, I guess.
It's work in progress, and as Representative alluded to earlier, we're just getting this going, right? The fact that we passed legislation and the ordinance to get it restarted and have a very specific composition of the authority is the first step. So it's work in progress.
Well, I would say too, when it comes to the formation of the authority, these authorities are typically formed under the municipal authority statute. That statute, you can have great flexibility in how you identify your board members. The reality is you want to have board members pulled from a cross section, a very diverse board. You want to have people coming from different walks of life so that you can have that input provided to the board when they make their decisions. As far as the staffing, you could do a model like that where you rely on the city providing support in terms of staff, executive director position, something like that. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to the Municipal Authorities Act and how you create those authorities.
Yes, as we look at best practices from these other organizations to determine how to put this together.
Yeah, I would say if it's a NIZ, you definitely want to be in touch with the city of Allentown, and I think there's at least one person that's already involved with the city that worked with the city of Allentown NIZ and has that experience. So I think that's great. You want to have people with experience there, and reach out to this.
And I'll call them out because I can, so you can see the names on the bottom of the screen. We all know Nathan Grace, who works for Congressman Muser. Nathan's also the mayor of Tamaqua. So we have a couple other resources in our pocket to be able to talk to with how we set some of this up and some ideas on what we can learn from what their experiences. So Nate appreciates when I put him on the spot like that.
Yeah, it's great. You're not working on this from scratch. You've got a very successful NIZ already created. You've got multiple CRIZ authorities that have been formed and are doing really well, doing great things. So certainly you want to be reaching out to those folks.
So my question is not for you, but for Representative Guzman. Senator Martin, all of these other folks, the talking points that you're using to motivate them to get this bill through the Senate, where are they and how can you share them with a greater group? Because if I am an individual from outside of this area, I'm not motivated. If I'm Senator Martin, I'm not motivated to please the governor and get this bill passed. I'm not motivated to do something for the city of Reading. I'm not speaking for him, but I'm just thinking about all of the other parties that need to make this decision. Where do you have those talking points? And you talked a little bit about starting to hit the green. Do you have a projection for that return on the investment?
So to answer your first part of your question, yes, McNeese has been hired by the city of Reading, and they're going to be the lobbying partner up there in Harrisburg, and so they're going to help us create the talking points that we're going to be using to specifically tailor to our Senate colleagues. But you're absolutely right. I mean, having those talking points are going to be so important in making sure that we sell it. What I will say, though, from the political lens, is that why would Senator Martin do it? Well, Senator Martin is also trying to protect one of his other senators in Erie County who has a tough reelection effort coming up. And so they also want to keep that seat, and they want to give that senator a win. And so that's how I'm playing it. You want to help Reading. Well, to help Reading, you got to help Erie. And so you want to give your senator a win going into a tough reelection cycle. This is the way to do it. And so that's me pressing my political buttons. I'm not saying that y'all have to do that, but there is a vested interest that the Senate has to hold on to that seat in Erie in order to keep their majority. And so they want to give their senator a win.
We should point out that Senator Martin does represent a chunk of Berks.
And he does represent Berks. So does Senator Gebhardt, but yes.
Yeah, he might not have been the best example, but he was mentioned earlier. So the talking points, when will they be ready from the
So obviously I'm not gonna put him on the spot, but I'm gonna defer to, the folks that are on the line, Jack and the folks from McNeese. Obviously, I can try to share some talking points in terms of what I've been working on and share those. But in terms of targeted talking points, in terms of talking to respected Senate individuals, I'm going to defer to McNeese to make sure that they share that. But they're the city of Reading's lobbying firm, and they're going to be leading the effort up there in Harrisburg, talking to folks across the aisle to make sure they know how important this is.
Some of the initial conversation was, what was the Senate even going to react to the bill itself? And we kind of don't know the answer to that. The response from Senator Pittman was the bill was intriguing. That doesn't answer a lot of questions. So I missed a call this morning, but I know the talking points from the PA chamber on the tax code bill specifically is there's a lot of good in it. There's a couple things we could fix. So, there's a reduction of corporate net income tax faster. And there's also reform for the net loss carryover, but there is combined reporting. And that is a little bit of a fatalistic thing because that will make a mess of what we get in terms of corporate net income tax reduction. So instead of saying the world is ending and the sky is falling because corporate net income tax is in there, we're taking from the standpoint of, isn't it great? There's a couple of these pieces and we can make some small fixes and it's all better. So trying to lead with a positive, and hopefully that does have a better reception with the Senate.
Who's saying that to the Senate right now?
That's PA chamber. They're having a call at 9 o'clock this morning. I sent around to everybody, there was a tax call with PA chamber last week or Wednesday this week to kind of talk about that specific ideal. There's also a group called Compete PA. That was the group that was pushing for the corporate net income tax reduction. So they were having a call this morning as well. And I think Senator Amont was on the PA chamber call this morning to kind of talk about, because he was the one who led the charge on corporate net income tax reduction. So they're kind of looking at, some of these good things that are in it. We just don't want to be the baby that gets thrown out with the bathwater. We want to say there's good things for everybody and us. Please keep that in the package. And we're also, dovetailing into what the governor's doing. He's talking about economic development a whole bunch. Rolling out right now from the Commonwealth is going to be the statewide economic development plan. So DCED is in the process of getting that out there in the community. And that's going to be part of the governor's budget proposal strategy for 24-25 is funding for economic development, opening these zones, opening up other opportunities. So it's kind of that talking point structure that he wants to go for 24. So I think that helps a lot of the arguments.
Can you just add that, Secretary Siger from DCD was in town, well, in Kutztown, but in Berks County the other day. We've had, it's mostly a small business chat, but, you know, part of the conversation that I was having with him was about, while the talking points for the governor's economic development plan are heavy on technology, they're not giving up Main Street and Elm Street. So they still want to do downtowns, they still want to do, include in that economic strategy, a commitment to the urban areas and to the cores and everything, and balance those two. So frankly, the conversation I was on more about how the SBDCs can help do that, but the greater conversation was that this is not, you know, an industrial policy that's all tech and nothing else. You know, it's really what they want to be balanced there.
I appreciate the governor putting former Senator Pat Brown in the position as Secretary of Revenue. You have a guy who is an absolute wonk, who understands this stuff and likes creative tax policy to get good opportunities. So having him in that position really does help a lot of these discussions. With an incoming potential budget shortfall. So that's, we gotta watch the clips that we come on to. Other questions? So this is, Representative, like you said, this is next week. Everybody comes back into session.
Yes,
So
next week is gonna be key.
lace up.
Next week is do or die time next week. I guess we'll get a better sense from our Senate colleagues in terms of how they feel about this. So next week is key. So again, if you have any senators on your contact list, on your email list, on your phone list, now's the time to start calling those chips in and making sure that they know where you stand on this issue and that they need to stand with us and keep the language as is. So thank you all for your time. I'm looking forward to a greater Berks County and a greater Reading.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, thank you, sir. I assume since now that McNeese has been brought on by the city, it will not be the last we see of you or fellow counterparts. So that's the goal.
I'll just note, I am a tax lawyer. I'm not a lobbyist, but I will say that my government relations colleague, one of my government relations colleagues, is on the Zoom, Jack Gomback, and I know he is readying an article that kind of also provides some context on this legislation and gives some of those talking points. So once that is out for public consumption, we'll be sure to have that circulated to everyone.
Stop share. There we go. Sometimes the technology works.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All righty, so just a couple other items for the group. Like I had mentioned, you guys have a copy, so I tried to get as much of this stuff to you as I could. There's other stuff that's going to follow up. We talked about the tax code a little bit. There is other things in talking points with legislative officials is the fact that there is a reduction of corporate net income tax in the bill. That is a huge positive. That speeds that up so that we can finally get that, and the governor is in favor of it. It was just how did we achieve that? So that's included in the tax package, as well as major fixes to net loss carryover. The other thing that's in the budget bill that we had been an advocate for was an expansion and an extension of the child independent tax credit program. So that's included. That basically the bill that we were in support of that would ramp up the money and have it for a longer amount of time is included. Hopefully that sticks in. There was overwhelming bipartisan support for that in the initial passage. And then it kind of got bogged up in just the mire that was the budget discussion this spring. But I don't know about anybody else. Childcare hasn't gotten any less expensive. So hopefully this gets to stay in. But included in the budget bill, like I said, or in the tax code bill is a sticking point, which is combined reporting. And interestingly enough, and again, I'm not the world's best expert on this, elements of the combined reporting that was included in this tax code bill is actually above and beyond what any other state program is. It's actually pretty egregious. So there is concerns that anything that we get in terms of CNIT reduction basically gets blown up by this combined reporting standard, and it puts a bunch of our multinational companies in a pressure point where they make a decision to leave Pennsylvania because it's so egregious. So hopefully, I know that provision is kind of dead on arrival in the Senate. that they'll, instead of saying, take the entire tax code, wipe it clean, that they'll just strategically remove some of these pieces that are a concern. That's kind of what we're hearing, but we haven't, they were all out of session last week, so still kind of waiting to hear what the position is going to be coming from them. And so there'll be more on that once we get a feeling from the Senate on where they're going. There is, so Representative did mention Senator Joe Pittman. He is the majority leader for the Senate. If you follow anything with PA Chamber or with Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, they are having their monthly business briefing with Senator Pittman October 30th at 10:30 in the morning. It's free to anybody to attend. It's on Facebook, so you can follow along. I typically do that to kind of keep track of what's going on, and that's usually some really good information for this group. As a reminder to everyone, if you weren't aware, there's an election coming up. Please make sure to get out to vote. We've got the general election coming. It's not just our commissioners' races and some of the local races, it's also our statewide judge races. There's a lot of conversation going on right now in the judicial space. We want to make sure that we pick judges that are going to be there for pro-business decisions. There's been a lot of decisions that have come out of the court lately, including venue shopping, that are going to be very detrimental to our community. The venue shopping rule relates to medical malpractice, and we're already seeing cases being taken to Philadelphia where there are huge jury awards, and it is now having an effect on medical malpractice insurance. We had that in the 90s and the early 2000s. They actually passed a law to fix it. The Supreme Court, with its current makeup, decided to make it a rule change. So the only way that you truly fix this issue is a constitutional amendment, which seems like a ridiculous amount of work to have to go through, but that's where we're at. So there is, I'm going to send that around to everybody. I didn't get a chance to include it in this stuff. There is some constitutional amendment language out there to try to fix this issue. But when we're a community where, yes, manufacturing is our #1 employer, but meds and eds are on the rebound and are on the up, having a venue shopping rule on the books, it can be detrimental to this economy here, to us locally. Wanted to real quick let you guys know there's a couple major events coming up. If you haven't seen it yet, so November 2nd, we are having a joint small business policy session with Schuylkill County Chamber and the National Federation of Independent Businesses. So this is a member event. So if you're a member of any of those 3 organizations, you can come into this event. We have invited the legislators from Schuylkill and Berks counties. Dave Argle's all excited to come say hi to everybody again. He said he missed us. That will be up in Hamburg at the Warehouse, WHERE. It's a new venue up there. I thought we'd spread the wealth and kind of go in between. Lovely folks, lovely owners, and trying to get them some new business and go to new parts of the county. But I've got 5 for sure confirmed, and I'm poking the rest of the crew to make sure who's going to come, but this will be focused on small business policy. That is November 2nd, and it'll be a breakfast event. I was teasing Bill Gage. He was like, "Oh, it's in Hamburg." I was like, "It's halfway for me. You can get up." So hopefully everybody can join us for that. And then working on, we did have in the interim our 2 legislative, our advocacy sponsor events. We had a session with Congressman Dean, and we had a tour of UGI. Thank you to Pam Whitmer, with Senator Gabhart and Senator Tracy Pennicook. That was a fantastic event. Got a chance to kind of see what their facilities are doing, as well as talk about policy issues in a small group environment. So if anybody's interested in supporting the advocacy program, I'm now rolling these out, actually having conversations with our fine friends at Comcast to do something with them and talk about broadband expansion and kind of get to see what they're doing. It's a good chance to kind of get a little deeper dive into some of these issue areas that we don't get to do in this morning session when there's so much to cover. So hopefully if folks are interested in that, you can participate. All righty. That's all I've got. Want to open up the floor, other issue areas, topics we didn't cover. And I'm going to be working on a 2024 calendar, trying to figure out when the commissioners event is going to be. It'll be in January. I just don't know what day in January yet. But working on trying to get a lot of that set up. And also, this is still open to ideas. We did a field trip last year to the airport. If we want to go see stuff, go do stuff, let me know. We can include that. Yes, sir.
I've recently gone through a replacement of a heart valve.
And we are glad to have you with us.
Still in the recovery phase, but healthcare has been on my mind of late. As mayor of Wyomissing, we have gotten a report from the medical college that Tower and Drexel have created. Hard to believe that they are already in their third class there, and it is going very well. Drexel is very pleased with it. It's going to become an increasingly larger part of their curriculum. In the meantime, I was well aware for a long period of time, Reading Hospital has had a school of nursing, and now I'm finding out about RAC doing an aggressive one. Alvernia has now announced a downtown thing with their college town campus. Is there anything the chamber is doing in regards to these newly educated healthcare people and keeping them here in Berks to whatever extent we can and so on?
Sure. So we actually, we're there was 3 awards done by the state last year, and we have a healthcare industry partnership. So similar to the manufacturing partnership, it's us and RAC with the Workforce Development Board. Part of it is convening these groups together to figure out what do they need, what are the pinch points on positions. You know, we all talk about nurses, but it's also phlebotomists, and it's catering staff, and it's maintenance folks. So it's not just one zone, but then also it's a conversation about how do we help those folks advance in their careers. So RAC is working with the state to set up a registered apprenticeship program. And it looks like it'll actually be a dual track, so 2 different ways to go. But then that starts to help them build up their folks in the pipeline. So that's Keith Stam, who works for us, is in charge of that industry partnership. We've been meeting with the universities. We've been meeting with the healthcare folks. I think we had our second one a couple weeks ago. And now we're kind of getting a handle on what do we have now, what do we need. Big part working with Tech Centro and others with Spanish language, because that's the other part of the healthcare industry is with the makeup of Reading and Berks. We need to be able to have those folks that can communicate with patients and have that as part of the system. So I know for Dr. Barbera, he will go to any event and say, if anybody has any credentials, I'll hire you today. But I know that they're actively working on that. We're trying to help with how do we build that capacity. So that's just getting kind of up and going. Yes, my dear.
I need to fill you in on this.
Oh, goody.
Albright and Full Experience Learning is a core member of an EDA Tech Hub grant specific to healthcare, and that's a regional. I think there's many counties involved in that. That is an application that is not yet confirmed. We had our first planning call yesterday, and so you know, the almost entire conversation surrounded workforce and workforce pipeline. There were many other issues brought forward for this grant, and there will be many other, I think, strategies if we are granted it. But workforce was almost the entire hour-long conversation. So that's something else that through a regional lens, if we get that, we'll be working on that, and I'll have to fill you in because there's a number of healthcare partners on that list that are outside of our area, but also many local. Right.
Well, and we're even not just the basic healthcare structure of the hospitals. We're also having genuine conversations with those in the long-term care, the home care facilities. They're struggling just as much, if not more, because of Medicare reimbursements are so low. They're struggling to get anybody to come in and be a part of that. And that's even Larry Medaglia from the county is part of it because they manage the Berks-Heim. He said they're at a point now where they're limiting bed access because they don't have enough nurses. So that's a concern, pinch point for all of us to not have that capacity. I was remiss. So Alan Schumann was kind enough to bring show and tell for some photos. Alan, I want to give you a chance to explain what these pictures were. We're a group of friends and why you wanted these to come to the group and under the vein of future planning and making sure we do this right.
Okay. take about 1 minute.
Okay.
So basically, I'm very familiar with the NIZ in Allentown. I've been up there lots of times. And what we've got here are lots of photos of all the $1.2 billion of new development going on up in Allentown. So I just wanted everybody to get an idea of what a NIZ means, not a CRIZ, but a NIZ. NIZ is, like they said, the CRIZ on steroids. So you're talking about 40, 50, $70 million buildings going up. It's a huge investment. However, if you go up there and actually talk to the municipality, the people who put it together, there's also a downside to that you got to be careful of. The downside is that if you don't have buildings and sites locked up in the beginning by responsible contractors, responsible developers, you end up with buildings locked up by speculators. There's 2 blocks in downtown Allentown that all have unsafe structures on the entire blocks. They're owned by developers out of New York and New Jersey. They're just speculators. They bought these buildings. They've been sitting there vacant for 10 years. They paid $200,000. They're up for sale for $15 million. They've done nothing to them. And those buildings, they already, we're 10 years into a 30-year NIZ. They've lost 1/3 of the benefit of the NIZ with absolutely no benefit to the downtown. So everybody knows Reading has an issue with New York, New Jersey, out-of-town speculators locking up buildings in the downtown, and the city seeming to be unable to do anything about that. So there's a very real chance that this could be hindered and end up with some of this if the city isn't on top of that.
Is there a way to stop that, Alan? Is there?
It's really up to the community development office in trying to make sure that you put pressure on buildings that are sitting there vacant without fire systems and stuff like that. But once the NIZ gets in there and gets approved, all of a sudden the owners of buildings like this will start spending money on legal fees to tie stuff up for as long as they can. Because they know that either this is their one chance for the municipality to throw money at it and them to pocket it.
Currently, a lot of those buildings in the city right now.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, there are. So in the downtown, I mean, we can just.
About some of the major ones.
So the Bear Building is a big one. The Madison Building, the Berkshire Building, of course, the city owns the Calla Hill Building. It's been sitting there for a decade with nothing going on. The Reading Trust Building, right next to the Stichter Building downtown. That's, and those are just the big buildings that are all over 50,000 square feet. And then there's dozens of ones that are smaller, that are more of this size, that could be a huge benefit, or could be sites to tear down to build that are just locked up. And from a development point of view, it took me 6 years to piece together the Reading Outlet Center, because there were a few people who happened to own a little parking lot here or there. And all of a sudden, a parking lot that they bought for $10,000 with a tax sale, they want $1 million for it. And it's even worse in this case, because they do know that there are big funds and the municipality really wants to do something, because they only have those funds for 30 years and then they're gone.
This might be a silly question, but is there a way, I'm sure these developers know that this NIZ is on the table, or is there a way to go and offer them dollars now at a higher level?
Most of them do not know anything like that. Reading's been talking about this for years.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a way to go and offer them dollars to purchase those buildings now at a higher level than what they might expect, but not at the level after the NIZ goes through.
There are certain groups that are kind of looking at that I've been talking to. But Reading's been at this point before with a CRIZ and never got it. So you don't have the speculators and you don't have people locking things up on options, but they're starting to.
Because the other, with the NIZ being an affordable housing piece as well, there's some of that, because it's 30% of the money has to go for affordable housing. So there may be some that they're worried about, they're tepid about that, because that might change the dynamics, or that might change the cost flow of it, so they might peel back a little bit.
Where you will see things really start to pick up is once the NIZ authority, CRIZ authority changes over to the NIZ authority, and they start designating the zone, because the zone's only up to 130 acres. So I know we have Pete in here who just left. He's got a property that's way out on the northwest side of town. You know, is the zone gonna go all the way out there? Maybe, maybe not. But once that area is designated, then you're gonna see a whole lot of interest. Then people will be looking specifically to lock things up.
And one of the other things we're gonna have to do is we have some zones already in Reading. Some of that might have to get peeled back. There's a KIZ or Keystone Improvement Zone. And that's around the university. So some of that might have to get dismantled first to then be able to do this. So yeah, it says 2024, but there may be some other paperwork that we have to go through to get it fully structured.
Katie, I don't know if you have a question or a comment on the chat, but I saw something.
Honey wanted to see the pictures.
Oh, sorry.
If you could hold up camera angle.
Oh,
See another one.
Versus the,
Vanna White. Now show the not so good.
Not so.
And that's, I mean, Alan was sweet enough to bring all of this for us. I mean, this is for our thoughts and our planning purposes is how do we think about this? How do we, take these issues in hand and have it as part of the discussions to make sure we don't do this. So, this, like I said, there's 4 other communities that have done something like this. There is lessons to be learned. They've got 10 years in other programs. And I have experience with the Tamaka one growing up. It took them a while to get themselves kind of up and going. But that was because CRIZ is incremental financing and it took a while to figure out what they were going to do. The nice part with NIZ is you can start issuing bonds off of expectations and you don't necessarily have to wait around. But it does have that caveat that it has to go through within a year and you can lose the money. So there does, hopefully that speeds it on as opposed to sitting around waiting for something to happen. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew what the pictures were in the show and tell and sort of vision boarding, cautionary tailing.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you. All righty. Any other comments, questions for the good of the order? Hearing none. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. We will reconvene in December.
So what do you think about the incentives? If you need help buying or selling in Reading, Berks County area or anywhere in the southeastern Pennsylvania, it's Pete Gustis with Philly Metro Commercial Real Estate, 610-209-9219. Have a great day. I look forward to helping you soon.